The first thing I remember after he slammed my head into the kitchen counter was the sound of the snow outside, that scraping, rhythmic sound of a neighbor's shovel on the driveway. Something so ordinary, so Tuesday morning in February, while my husband stood over me in our kitchen in Barrie, his knuckles still white, telling me I had brought this on myself. I didn't scream. I had learned not to scream. My daughter was in the next room. She was 5 years old and she was watching Bluey with the volume turned up. And I remember thinking, she can't hear this, please, she can't hear this, while I pressed my palm flat against the linoleum and tried to figure out if my wrist was broken. It wasn't, but something else broke that morning, something I hadn't even known was still intact. My name is Leah. I'm 31 years old. I grew up in Sudbury, the youngest of three, raised by a mother who worked double shifts at the hospital and a father who fixed engines on weekends and made pancakes on Sunday mornings shaped like animals. My childhood was loud and warm and completely ordinary in the best possible way. I did not grow up thinking, one day a man will make you afraid of your own kitchen. Nobody grows up thinking that. I met my husband when I was 24. He was charming the way some men are charming, confidently, deliberately, in a way that makes you feel chosen rather than targeted. He had a good job in sales, drove a nice truck, knew everyone's names at every restaurant we went to. My mother liked him immediately. My father shook his hand and said he seemed solid. We were married within 18 months. I was pregnant 3 months after that. The first time he grabbed me, our daughter was 6 weeks old. I told myself it was stress. He had been passed over for a promotion. The baby wasn't sleeping. We were both exhausted. I told myself that so many times it became the background noise of our marriage. It's stress, it's the money, it's the hours. He didn't mean it. He won't do it again. He always did it again. The morning everything changed had started like every other February morning in that house. He had been on his phone the night before in the bathroom with the door locked, which he'd been doing for weeks. When I asked about it, he said it was a work group chat, and the way he said it, that flat, warning tone told me not to ask again. So I didn't. I made coffee. I got our daughter, Nadia, dressed in her purple snow pants for junior kindergarten. I was packing her backpack when he came into the kitchen and I said something small, something I genuinely cannot remember. Something about whether he'd paid the Enbridge bill because I'd seen a notice and that was all it took. That was all it ever took. He moved fast. He always moved fast when he was like that. My head hit the counter and I went down on one knee and my wrist folded under me wrong. And for a second the whole room tilted sideways. I heard Bluey in the other room. I heard the neighbor's shovel. I heard him breathing above me. That particular quiet that meant he was deciding whether he was done. Then I heard small footsteps. Nadia appeared in the kitchen doorway in her purple snow pants, her backpack on, one mitt dangling from its clip. She looked at me on the floor. She looked at her father. Her face went very still in a way that no 5-year-old's face should ever go still. He told her to go back and watch her show. His voice was calm. That terrifying, practiced calm. Nadia didn't move. She looked at me and I looked at her and I gave her the smallest nod I could manage. The nod we had practiced without ever actually practicing it, the silent language that mothers and children develop in houses where they are learning to survive. She turned around and went back to the living room. He told me to get up and stop being dramatic. Then he put on his jacket and left for work. I sat on the kitchen floor for a long time. Nadia came and sat beside me and didn't say anything. She put a small hand on my knee. After a while, she asked if we were still going to school today, and I said yes, of course, let me just get my shoes. I drove her to school. I watched her walk through those double doors and I sat in the parking lot on Maple Avenue for 20 minutes, engine running, heat blasting, and I thought about my mother. I called her. My mother answers the phone the same way she has answered it my entire life. First ring, no hesitation, like she has always been waiting. The moment she said hello, I started crying in a way I had not let myself cry in years. Not the silent crying I did in the bathroom at night. The other kind. The kind that comes from somewhere below your ribs. She didn't say, I told you so. She didn't ask why I hadn't called sooner. She said, tell me where you are. My mother drove 3.5 hours from Sudbury that same day. She packed a bag like she was coming to stay, which she was, and she called my aunt on the highway, and my aunt called my cousin Deb, who is a paralegal in Guelph. And by the time my mother arrived at my front door, the outline of a plan had already begun to form around me like scaffolding. I hadn't told my mother everything before that morning. I had told her things were hard. I had told her he has a temper. I had never told her about the counter, or the time before that, or the time before that, or the time before that. I don't think I had the words for it. Not because the words don't exist, but because saying them out loud would have made them permanently real, and I was still, even then, negotiating with myself about what was real. My mother stood in my kitchen, the same kitchen, and I watched her look at the counter. There is a small chip in the laminate edge where my head had hit it. She looked at that chip and she didn't say anything for a very long time. Then she said, you're not staying here another night. We left that afternoon before he got home. I packed Nadia's things first, her clothes, her stuffed rabbit Clementine, her library books, her vitamins, then I packed mine. We didn't take much. My mother had a look on her face that meant we can replace everything else. I left him a note that said nothing except I've taken Nadia. Don't call. He called 47 times between 6 and 11 that night. My cousin Deb connected me with a family law lawyer named Sandra who worked out of a small office above a coffee shop on Wyndham Street in Guelph. I saw her 2 days after I left. She had a calm, direct manner that I found enormously comforting. Not soft, not clinical, somewhere in between. She asked me to tell her everything. So I did. I told her things I had not said out loud before, things I had been keeping in a box inside myself, and I watched her write notes in a legal pad, and I felt something shift in the room. When I finished, she set down her pen and said, you have more than enough to proceed. The question is, how far do you want to take this? I said, how far can I take it? She said there were 2 parts. The first was a separation agreement, cleaned, documented, focus on custody and the house and our joint accounts at TD. The second was pursuing a formal police report for domestic assault, which would open up a criminal process alongside the family law process and which would be harder and longer and more exposed, but which would create a permanent legal record. I asked her what she recommended. She said, I can't answer that. But I can tell you that what you've described is not a temper. It is a pattern. And patterns continue until something stops them. I looked out the window at the Guelph street below, at people walking past with coffee cups and rosary bags, at a guy shoveling a front step the same way my neighbor had been shoveling his driveway that Tuesday morning in February. I said, I want to go all the way. What followed was not a movie. I want to be clear about that. It was not dramatic or swift or satisfying in the way that stories are satisfying. It was paperwork. It was a lot of sitting in waiting rooms. It was phone calls with the victim services unit at the OPP. It was filling out forms and then filling out more forms and then being told I needed different forms. It was also, in ways I hadn't expected, people. The officer who took my statement was a woman who had clearly done this many times. She didn't flinch. She didn't suggest maybe I had misunderstood. She asked clear questions, wrote down clear answers, and when she was done, she handed me a card with her direct number and said, call me if you remember anything else or if he contacts you in a way that makes you uncomfortable. Not if you need anything. Specifically, if he contacts you in a way that makes you uncomfortable. Like she already knew he would. He did. He sent emails. Long ones, then short ones, then long ones again. Some were angry, some were the other kind. The ones that reminded me why I had married him, the ones that sounded like the man I thought I was choosing when I was 24. Those were harder to read than the angry ones. My mother read them with me the first time. After that, she said, I'll read them first and tell you if there's anything you legally need to respond to. And that is what she did. for 3 months, sitting at my aunt's kitchen table in Sudbury, going through his emails while I made dinner and helped Nadia with her reading homework. He had been seeing someone for at least 2 years. Sandra uncovered this during the financial disclosure process. There were e-transfer records, hotel stays, a credit card I hadn't known about. The amounts weren't enormous, but they were consistent. Dinners, weekends, a trip to Montreal I had been told was a sales conference. I had suspected. I think I had known, the way you know things you're not ready to look at. The confirmation landed differently than I expected, not with devastation but with something closer to relief, because it meant that what had happened in that kitchen had not been about me. It had never been about me. It had been about a man who had built a second life and needed the woman in his first life to stay small enough not to notice. Our house in Barrie went on the market in April. Because we'd only owned it for 4 years and the mortgage was still substantial and the market had cooled that spring, we nearly broke even enough to pay Sandra's fees and the first and last on a 2-bedroom apartment in Sudbury, close to my mother. I had been working part-time as a dental receptionist while Nadia was in school, and I started full-time the same week we moved in. My employer, when I explained the situation, moved my schedule without being asked. Sometimes people surprise you. The custody arrangement took the longest. He fought it, not I think because he wanted to be present in Nadia's life, but because it was the one remaining place where he had leverage. Sandra was unruffled by this. She had seen it before. We documented everything, every missed video call, every late pickup, every time Nadia came home from his supervised access visits and wouldn't talk for an hour. The court takes notes on these things. It turns out the court takes very careful notes. The final order gave me primary residence. He has access on alternating weekends, supervised for the first year pending a review. He is required to complete a program through family services. His criminal matter resulted in a peace bond, which means there are conditions on how he can contact me. The day Sandra called to tell me the order had been issued, I was standing in the parking lot of the Loblaws on Paris Street after picking up groceries. I sat down on the bumper of my car in the slush. I called my mother. She picked up on the first ring. I want to tell you something about Nadia. She started seeing a play therapist in October, a gentlewoman who works out of a community health center on Elm Street. Nadia calls her the feelings doctor, which I find both heartbreaking and accurate. She goes every other week and she comes out looking lighter than when she went in. And lately, she has started drawing pictures of our new apartment, the yellow couch, the cat we adopted named Biscuit, the view of the sugar maple out the living room window that is going to be extraordinary in the fall. She is 5 years old. She is the most resilient person I have ever met, and I say that having watched my mother drive 3.5 hours on a Wednesday without being asked. The night we moved into the apartment on N Street, our apartment, our own, Nadia stood in the middle of the empty living room in her socks and spread her arms out wide and spun in a slow circle and said, "There's so much room." I thought she meant square footage. I think now she meant something else. People ask me carefully, kindly, whether I'm angry, whether I hate him, whether I regret the years I spent making myself smaller so he could feel larger. I don't have a clean answer to any of those questions. I have a complicated one, which is that I loved the person I thought he was, and I grieved him, and I am still somewhere in that grief even now. You don't unhook yourself from 7 years of a life in a straight line. It curves back on itself. Some mornings I wake up and I'm just tired. Some mornings I wake up and I think, we are okay. We are actually okay. What I know is this. The morning I called my mother from the school parking lot, I was not brave. I was not strong. I was sitting in a Honda Civic with a sore wrist and mascara I hadn't finished putting on, and I was terrified. Bravery is not the absence of terror. It is just the phone call you make anyway. I called. My mother answered on the first ring. That was enough. It turned out that was exactly enough. If you are in a house where you have learned to be quiet, where you have learned to read the weight of footsteps on the stairs, where you know by a certain silence that tonight will be one of those nights. Please hear this. There is a first ring. Someone will pick up. You do not have to already know what to say. You just have to dial. I think about cause and effect a lot now. Not in a dramatic way, just quietly, while I'm making dinner or watching Nadia do her homework at the kitchen table in our apartment on Elm Street. Every choice I made and every choice he made led somewhere specific. His choices led to a peace bond and a supervised access schedule and a room he no longer lives in. Mine led to this kitchen, this yellow couch, a cat named Biscuit asleep on the radiator. That's not fate, that's just how consequences work when you finally stop absorbing them alone. What I understand now, that I couldn't see from inside that marriage, is that cruelty requires silence to survive. He needed me not to call, not to tell, not to name what was happening out loud. The moment I sat in that parking lot and dialed my mother's number, I broke the one condition his behavior depended on. The whole structure started coming apart from that single phone call. Not because of anything dramatic, just because I finally told the truth to one person who loved me and she picked up on the first ring. I spent a long time thinking that leaving required a kind of courage I didn't have. What I actually needed was something quieter than courage. I needed to be honest with myself about what I already knew. I had known for a long time. I had just been negotiating with that knowledge, bargaining with it, filing it away. The clarity wasn't brave, it was just accurate. And accuracy, it turns out, is its own kind of power. Sandra told me once, during one of our appointments above that coffee shop on Wyndham Street, that the women who do best in these processes are the ones who can hold two things at once: the grief of what the relationship was and the clear-eyed understanding of what it had become. She was describing a kind of intelligence that isn't taught anywhere, that you develop the hard way, in the space between who you wanted someone to be and who they actually are. I think she was right. The women who move forward aren't the ones who stopped feeling. They're the ones who learned to feel without letting feeling override what they could plainly see. And then there is Nadia. 5 years old, purple snow pants, one mitt dangling from its clip, standing in that doorway and reading the room with a precision that no child should have to develop, and making a choice anyway. I don't know what to call what she did except this: she did not freeze, and she did not look away, and when I needed her to understand without words, she understood. That is not something I taught her, that is something she came with. But I think the steadiness she showed that morning came, in part, from having watched me keep going on the harder days, making her lunch, reading her stories, showing up in small ways even when I had very little left. Children learn endurance by watching it. I didn't know I was teaching her anything, I was just trying to get through each week. The apartment is small. The maple out the front window is not yet in leaf. Nadia asked me last week if we could get a second cat, and I said maybe in the summer, and she said okay and went back to her drawing. That ordinary exchange, that easy, unguarded okay, is worth more to me than anything I left behind in that house in Bury. We are not the story of what happened to us. We are what we did next.